Alright, good morning everybody. Last night, I'll mention my sins once again. I went to the movies. I went to see the movie Menashe, which is a movie all in Yiddish. Actually, I auditioned for this movie, but I didn't have time. I was so busy with work, I didn't have time to schlep to the city and do all these different things. So I was just like, Al Farlaz, but it's so interesting how many people I know and I've known for many years who were in this movie, friends of mine, acquaintances of mine, neighbors of mine, relatives of friends and neighbors of mine who are involved with this. So I just find it quite fascinating, and it's really a beautiful work. I'm someone who likes the old-fashioned movies, so I understand this is the style today, which is different than I'm used to. But it's quite beautiful. It was quite beautiful, very well done, very real. I'll talk about a very personal feeling that I had from watching this film, because it really gave, there's been several films over the past few years. I mean, over the years there are many films that deal with Judaism and Jews, made by many different types, and there's more mainstream films, less mainstream films, and the history behind that. I mean, Jewish themes go back, of course, a long time in film, all over the world. The Golem legend, of course, was prominent in several German films, silent films by Paul Wegener. There were other similar films. Every now and then Jewish themes would appear, even incidentally, in Charlie Chaplin. People accused Chaplin of being Jewish. And he said he wishes he were. Excuse me. One of his wives was at least partially Jewish. Paulette Goddard her father was Jewish, for sure. Her mother, I'm not so sure. She was from Great Neck, New York. That was his third wife, I believe. He was married 4 times. His last wife, his fourth wife, who he spent the rest of his life with, was Una O'Neill. But sometimes in some of Chaplin's films, you would see very obviously Jewish characters. One film in particular, I don't remember the name of the film, one of the shorts that came out in like 1917 or so, you see this character of a patriarchal figure with reading a Yiddish newspaper, with a big beard and a big yarmulke on. Was kind of incidental to the film, and of course, excuse me again, when sound came, the first major feature film with sound was The Jazz Singer, which was a Jewish story, of course, about a chazan and a cantor and his son who went off the derech, but then just before his father passes away, and he goes and becomes a jazz singer, and then just before he passes away, he comes back to sing Kol Nidre. And of course that story was remade at least twice. I can think of once with Jerry Lewis. I actually have. It was a TV film. I have it on DVD. I haven't seen it yet. And then the Neil Diamond version, which I've seen scenes from. I know my wife said that one of her friends was obsessed with that film, and she never really liked it much. And I've never seen it. I heard it's not that good. Really, kind of The Simpsons, Like Father, Like Clown, was somewhat based on the jazz singer, and it pays no homage to it when Jackie Mason's character is the rabbi. He's like, oh, if he were a jazz singer, that I could forgive, but not a clown. And then there was a whole repertoire of Yiddish theater that went into film, and Molly Khan and Maurice Schwartz and others, who made Yiddish films, which were, and Edgar G. Ulmer actually made quite a few Yiddish films, and then later went into, making these very brilliant Poverty Row, English language films. He's a fascinating director, Ulmer, and some of his, science fiction films and so forth. But, probably, I'm pretty sure Ulmer did Detour, which is a fantastic film noir, of course in English, but he also did quite a few Yiddish films. And a lot of these would be filmed like on Long Island, and probably my favorite of all the Yiddish films was Tevye. A lot of these Yiddish films are very difficult to watch. They're not very good, but they're historically important, But Tevye was very good, and they were aware how good it was. They were very self-aware, even though it was low budget. Sorry about the roads. But I think like the advertisement said like the greatest Yiddish film ever made. And that, of course, when we talk about Jewish films, so like, you can't forget basically the remake of Tevye, the musical, what's it called? Fiddler on the Roof. But, and there were many other, similar, that Fiddler on the Roof, like The Jazz Singer, was more of a mainstream film. There was The Chosen with Robbie Benson, and which of course is more or less a mainstream book that became, a rather minor mainstream film, a very critically acclaimed one, but not as famous as, say, as Fiddler. And other Jewish themes that pop up in film here and there, like Rabbi Jacob, is the famous French film I have yet to see about what was it, some kind of a gangster who disguises himself as a Hasidic rabbi to escape, and there's all these very choreographed scenes of dancing with the Hasidim and things like that. Other representations, Jewish film. Now this is, and then we have this new phenomenon of stories made by, because then you had, particularly in the 90s, some not only poorly made films, but very disrespectful anti-religious films, like A Price Above Rubies, which no one should ever watch, and Kadosh, which no one should ever watch. There was one film that's considered a rather minor film, not considered to be very good, but I feel was a very positive film, even though it had some negative aspects, but nonetheless, maybe not exactly, but could perhaps be realistic. Or so it was A Stranger Among Us. A friend of mine, he said when he was a little kid, he was an extra in that right at the beginning. But you have this new phenomenon, and of course you have the films that are made very low budget and very poorly made films that are made by Orthodox producers like the Groveiss brothers and so forth, which are interesting stories, but they're just very, very poorly made. And there are similar things like that, like a Geschäft the Growweiss brothers are Israeli, and they make it in Hebrew, and they dub them into English. And then there was a movie, a Geschäft, which was in Yiddish, and there was no continuity. Again, it was an interesting story, but it was, poorly acted, very poor continuity. But it was fun to watch, as a Hasidic Yid, to see this film. But then, so these are, more along the lines of low budget, low production values. And then the past few years, there's a new phenomenon, mostly in Israel, of high production value stories that have religious themes and yet have universal stories and messages for the most part. The first one like this, which is probably the most religious of them, was the Ushpizin. The first I can think of this category, and that was really a groundbreaking film, Ushpizin, which was a very religious film, very, very religious, with a very strong story, very well made, and very uplifting. Subsequently, then you had films that are made more from a female perspective. One that I did get to see was L'malei et Halal, Filling the Void, which to me is like, a Jane Austen novel, that just happens to be set in the Haredi community in the Holy Land, in Jerusalem. And of course, these films are in Hebrew for the most part, with perhaps some Yiddish dialogue or English dialogue here and there, but mostly in Hebrew, with very clear stories. There was another film I heard about, I haven't seen, one of my co-workers told me about, and I heard elsewhere it was called The Wedding Plan. Also, and that one, I think, from what I understand, is more of a religious tale as opposed to Filling the Void, which is not a particular religious story. It's a story that could take place anywhere, and just happens to be taking place in a religious context. Of course, the particulars of the story are maybe stronger in a religious environment. So then we come to this film, Menashe, and like I said, I've known a lot of people who were involved in this film. I auditioned for the film. A lot of friends and acquaintances who were in it, and it got very high critical acclaim. And I'm thankful that it got to be released here, because I was in certain films that never got any release at all. I mean, there was a film that I was in called David Mayer, when they're still looking for a distributor for this film, and they put a lot of money into making the film, and it looks very good. I haven't seen it, actually. I was just an extra. But I would have liked to have seen the film. It sounds like a very nice, but this is a distinctly religious story, but they couldn't get a distributor for it. And so it's still kind of sitting and waiting, kind of sitting on the shelf, looking for a distributor. If anybody would like to distribute it, it could be in contact with Moshe Moniz or with what's his name, Darren Schwartz, to distribute this film, which I think might be worthwhile, because it looks very good to me. For what I've seen, it did get very limited release, in film festivals, but it never got a wide release. It never got a DVD release. it's only really available to like groups and things, for a DVD rental. But that being said, and like I said, I never had an opportunity to see it. This film yesterday was, in the style of what I understand to be. I don't really watch new movies except Star Wars and Jurassic Park. But what I understand is that this is the style that is considered artistically valuable today. Can be compared to other very serious films that have come out. And it was extremely well done, extremely well acted, extremely well produced and directed. Really quite brilliant. The story is extremely simple, but gritty and realistic. And it didn't have that uplifting quality of a film like the Spiesen or Filling the Void, and because I have ideas for films that I would like to make, and I really should at least start writing screenplays or something, and see what could be produced, see what we can develop. And it's funny because I had one idea which is really already done. It was a very little-known French-Canadian film called Shabbat Shalom that I only saw one time. They broadcast it on the City University of New York cable station when I was a kid. I remember perhaps in the late 90s seeing this on TV at my grandmother's house. And it was a story that is very similar to the story that I would like to tell. And it's about a zoning dispute about Hasidim want to open a shul in their home because a lot of times, especially in Montreal, they try to prevent religious institutions in private in residential areas. And I think with the pshara was at the end, how do you say pshara of English? You say compromise was that they could have a minyan in the rabbi's home, but they couldn't have a sign up on the door that it was a synagogue. And that was which is something that in general, there have been many court cases over, both in Canada and in the United States. I think particularly about I remember I met him once, the Kerstira Rebbe in Miami, in Miami Beach, and how he turned his home into a synagogue, and the controversy surrounding that, and how he won the court case. An acquaintance of his son, who actually has a home in Sullivan County, but that was all a backdrop to a story in this film Shabbat Shalom, about a young man who is growing in his interest in Judaism, even he wasn't Jewish, and his friendship with a girl who was running away from her Judaism, and at one point he calls her a self-hating Jew, and it reminds me sometimes of Curb Your Enthusiasm, how Larry, what's his name? He says, Larry David, he says, I hate myself, but it has nothing to do with being Jewish. But this film, it was quite an interesting film. Maybe it wasn't as well made as some others I can think of, but it was very interesting. put that aside for a moment. Get back to this, and that was really the type of story I wanted to tell in English. Similar type of stories going on here, and perhaps making a story about, because we have here a lot of Jewish people who are not religious, who oppose the Hasidim, and I would like to make a story perhaps of let's say this woman who is fighting against the Hasidim in some small town upstate, and she is Jewish herself, and then her son, or perhaps even her daughter, might make it even a more interesting film, perhaps, I don't know, getting drawn and joining the Hasidim, becoming Hasidic himself. I think that would be a fascinating story to tell, but like I spoke to Josh Weinstein about the idea who made Menashe, and he felt that it was too political, and he didn't want to make a political film. He just wanted to make a slice of life film, which is exactly what he made here. The story is just about an alman, a widower, and his son. And it's just a very plain slice of life, very gritty and realistic. And it was extremely well done. So the difference I want to talk about personally, you talk about a film like Ushpizin, which is so uplifting, and how that film, encourages thoughts of teshuvah. Is a perfect time now in Elul to talk about that. How a film like that, but that's teshuvah me'ahava, it inspires repentance, inspires returning to God, and that film inspires teshuvah me'ahava. It inspires repentance out of love, and like I said, it's a very religious movie. This movie, even though it's filled with religious themes and it's about religious people, this is not necessarily a story about religion, and neither is Filling the Void, really, perhaps. However, this film made me want to do Teshuvah Me'ira. Me'ira's Hadin. It awakened feelings of dinim, of strict judgment, of difficulty, and it put me into a Teshuvah mood, put me into a mood of repentance, of reflection, of return to God, and just even personally, whatever thoughts I had that were irreverent, perhaps, before I came into that theater, were just wiped away, and it put me into a very somber mood, which I think is very fitting for Elul. So, that being said, I highly recommend, if you have the opportunity to see this film, Menashe, to see it. Not just because it's supporting friends of mine who made it, and I'm very proud of them, and very inspired. It's just even the incidental actors and extras and bit parts in the film. I was like, isn't that so and so? I know him, but the way they made him looked a little different than I know him, and I'm not going to name names right now. It's not for me to name drop. I was like, I said to my friend, isn't that so and so? And he looks kind of different, and indeed it was so and so, and I was like, and isn't that so and so? And well, that's definitely so and so, So like I said, we're very impressed. If you're looking for a very dynamic story, this is not what you have here. But if you're looking for a real slice of life with a story that's very personal and intense in its minutiae and very subtle, it's that still small voice type of story, this is what you're going to find here. You're going to find a story of imperfect people, of troubled people, of people who are dealing with their own personal demons that are very subtle and dealing with them in a very subtle way. And like I said, this story really inspired me to get into this feeling of what Elul is about, which I've had a very hard time with this month. You know, we're already 10 days into Elul, and alright, so we say L'David every day and we blow the shofar, but I've had a very hard time getting into that Elul feeling, and in fact I've experienced maybe just the opposite up until this point, and this experience really turned me around. You know, today's the yartzeit of Rebbe Pinchas of Koretz. There happens to be my daughter's birthday. It also happens to be a yartzeit of one of my second cousin of mine who's from. I'll share with you something very personal. You know, I remember I went to Uman one time. It was 2006. It was just before I got married. You know, a few months before my wedding. And I had quite an interesting experience there. And so I was in Oman, and I visited also Mezhbush and Berditchev on Erev Rosh Hashanah. And then after we left, if I remember correctly, the first day of Rosh Hashanah that year was Shabbos. And so I was there, you know, so we had 2 days of Rosh Hashanah. I'm pretty sure one of the days was Shabbos, so I'll do the Rosh, so it would have to be, right, the first day has to be, only the first day could be Shabbos. So what's that noise? So anyway, it's probably time for me to get an oil change, isn't it? Yeah. Oh, we're past that already. On Monday I'll have to get an oil change. I can't do it today, and I can't do it. I don't know if Sunday I'll be able to. We'll see. So on the way home, I was on a bus and we stopped at different kibbutz tzadikim on the way home, and we wanted so much to go do Rebbe Pinchas. I've told this story many times. There's something very special about this event. It was on this little bus that we had mostly regular Hasidic boys. One was a little bit more oifgeklärt but frum, and then the rest is regular Hasidic bachrim. And then there were two, me and another friend of mine, who were not, didn't grow up Hasidic. myself, people know my story, and the other one, a yartzeit, from Oklahoma with a Cherokee Indian background, who lives in Williamsburg. And then there were two boys who had grown up more from Hasidish and who left, but still were interested to go to Uman. And one of those boys, he said, "Oh, I'm not religious." I said, "No, you're not observant, but you're clearly religious, or otherwise you won't be schlepping to Uman." So this boy was so upset that we couldn't go to the Rebbe Pinchas. The thing was, some of the boys were on an earlier flight, and we would have missed their flight if we would have gone not to Uman, to the Rebbe Pinchas. Of course, we were all in Uman. He was very upset we couldn't go to the Rebbe Pinchas. So then the Hasidic boy said, "What difference is it to you? You're not even from." He said, "Well, I don't know these other guys, but I know Rebbe Pinchas." And to me, that's such a deep statement. Now, the Rebbe Pinchas, that's one part of the story. So we went to the Toldus, to Polnoya, but of all the places I went, and I would have thought, Berditchev, I would have had the biggest errors in Mezhbush, and people told me about the biggest errors they had in Mezhbush, and Uman, and all these places, and where did I have the biggest Cyrus was in Shpetivka, and Shpetivka is the kever of Rebbe Pinchas of Koretz. I was like, what is this about Rebbe Pinchas of Koretz? Why do I have a Cyrus to Rebbe Pinchas of Koretz? And I thought to myself, is it because every day they say Rebbeinu Shalom Necheni B'derech HaEmes. In the siddur I daven usually from the siddur from Toldos Avram Yitzchak, and he has right under my da'ani, he said that Pinchas of Koretz would always tell his talmidim that they should constantly pray Rebbeinu Shalom Necheni B'derech HaEmes. Please, Master Universe, guide me in the path of truth. And if you rely on God that way, I've told many people this, we're dealing with issues in Hashkafa, I said you got to ask God to guide you on the way of truth. I remember there was one in German, Balshuva, I think, but he was confused with certain Hashkafas, and to the point where he was following the most famous Mashiach Sheker. But he saw him not in the way that most of his followers see him, but rather saw him as a Tana, and he figured he's a Talmud of this Tana, which he's of course not a Tana, and of course we have nothing to do with him. And I said to this Ingerman, I said, Pinchas Koretz taught that we should daven Rebbeinu Shalom Necheni B'derech HaEmes. It was interesting because someone said to me, a friend of mine said I should be Makarev him. I said, how can I be Makarev him? What tools would I have? Well, just try. And then I think those were the days when people started MySpace. Remember MySpace? I tried to get into my MySpace account because I'd written so many things. I had correspondence with people and I couldn't get into the account. I don't remember what account I used to get in there, what email I used, so I mean, MySpace is still there, believe it or not. There's still MySpace. I heard this one comedian, he said that his mother got MySpace and Facebook confused, so she would call it My Face. So this fellow, after this story, he changed after I spoke to him about this, he changed his profile with his views or his religious views. He said, he was a follower of this Oisa Ish, who I'm not going to mention, although once I say Oisa Ish, people know who I'm talking about. And instead, but he wrote it up in Hebrew or whatever, and instead he said he's a follower of the Derech HaEmes, of the way of truth, which is what I found interesting. So, like I said, this. So I thought, what is this service I have by Rebbe Pinchas of Koretz? And I said maybe it's because this Rebbeinu Shalom, the Necheni b'derech ha'emes, guide me in the way of truth. And that way, for the lastig of the Rebbeinu Shalom, that God will guide us in the way of truth. We make that decision to follow God and not to be misled by falsehood. So then, so then it's like, then I realized, what other shaykhs might I have to Rebbe Pinchas of Koretz? Or so my wife, people know, is a Gioris. So on the Bezdin for her gear, the Rosh Bezdin was Rebbe Steinberg Shlita, Badal Chaim Tovim, and I don't know who the third on the Bezdin, but the second on the Bezdin was Rebbe Shlomo Shapiro, Zecher Tzadik Levracha, the Koretz Rebbe from Queens, Ben Acher Ben from Rebbe Pinchas of Koretz. So that maybe Episayichus to Rebbe Pinchas of Koretz, that one of the people who are responsible for my wife being Jewish is Ben Acher Ben from Rebbe Pinchas of Koretz. He never called himself Koretz Rebbe, but I'll call himself. His father was Taka Koretz Rebbe. And then we saw that my second daughter, Razel, was born on the yartzeit of Rebbe Pinchas of Koretz. So, maybe that was also shaykhs. So, because I had this very intense religious experience by Rebbe Pinchas of Koretz that I didn't have in any of the other forum in Ukraine. So that's just a story I have for the yartzeit of Rebbe Pinchas of Koretz. Many great teachings and stories of Rebbe Pinchas of Koretz. He was a very special tzaddik, and I encourage people to learn his Torahs. And Midrash Pinchas is, of course, the most famous of his writings, but there are many things quoted in his name, many stories about him. But But that's my experience about Rebbe Pinchas of Koretz. It was just, and if that's one thing we can say, even if you don't say it every day, but if today, in memory of Rebbe Pinchas of Koretz, to say the words Rebbeinu Shalom, Necheni, B'derech ha'emes, Rebbeinu Shalom, graciously guide me. That word Necheni, it's different from Hadricheni. It's different from guide me. It's Necheni. It's have grace on me and graciously guide me in the way of truth. It's a very deep prayer and a very brief prayer that we can always pray all the time. And it should be a schus for Pinchas of Koretz that we remember him, and a schus for us that we remember him, and that we continue to pray Rebbeinu Shalom, Necheni, B'derech ha'emes, Master of the universe, graciously guide me in the way of truth. Alright, thank you for watching. God bless. Please like, share, and subscribe, and comment, and looking forward to continuing the conversation. Thank you very much. Be well. Excuse me.